Heart story. It was supposed to be just another Saturday, until a rusty toolbox changed everything. 23-year-old Evan Cole had no real reason to stop at the faded yellow house on Maple Street. He'd been driving home from yet another job interview that ended in polite rejection. His savings were thin, his spirit thinner. But something about the crooked yard sale sign and the rows of old items on mismatched tables tugged at his curiosity. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was hope. He parked and wandered through the clutter, cracked flower pots, faded novels, a tangle of extension cords. Then he saw it, a beat-up red toolbox tucked beneath a folding chair, its hinges rusted shut, one handle barely hanging on. $5, said the elderly woman in the sun hat, her voice surprisingly firm. Evan didn't hesitate. He handed her a crumpled bill, not knowing he'd just bought the first piece of the rest of his life. Back in his small apartment, Evan placed the toolbox on the kitchen table like an artifact. It smelled faintly of oil and old wood, the kind of scent that clung to garages and grandfathers. He used a butter knife to pry the lid open, slowly, carefully, until it creaked free. Inside lay a mess of weathered tools, a flathead screwdriver with a wooden handle, pliers with electrical tape around the grips, a tiny wrench engraved with the initials, JTR. Underneath the tools was a folded cloth stained with grease. As he lifted it, a small hidden panel popped loose, revealing a faded envelope sealed with brittle wax. His breath caught. The handwriting was delicate but sharp, and the paper was yellowed with age. It read, "To the one who finds this story belongs to you now." Heart pounding, Evan sat down slowly. Something told him this wasn't just someone's old junk anymore. Evan carefully broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter. The ink had faded but remained legible. It began with, "My name is James T. Redding. If you're holding this, then time has done its part." The letter wasn't long, just a page and a half, but each word felt heavy. James wrote about his years working as a wartime mechanic, fixing engines under fire and patching together hope with grease-stained hands. He spoke of a final project never finished and a desire that whoever found the toolbox would carry it forward. Alongside the letter was a black-and-white photo, a younger James standing beside a truck, holding the very same toolbox, smiling with quiet pride. Evan read the letter twice, then a third time. He felt something stir inside him, a curiosity, a responsibility. This wasn't just a collection of tools. It was a map. And it was asking to be followed. The next morning, Evan spread the letter and photo on his desk like a puzzle waiting to be solved. The name James T. Redding meant nothing to him, at least, not yet. But the way the letter spoke of building more than machines stuck with him. He examined every detail, the looping signature, the smudge near the bottom corner, the phrasing. One sentence in particular echoed, "This box holds more than bolts, it holds my last lesson." Evan flipped the letter over and noticed a faint imprint, as if something had once been pressed against the back. He held it up to the light and spotted a faint outline, what looked like a hand-drawn schematic or plan. He traced it with his finger, more intrigued than ever. There was something unfinished here, something waiting to be discovered. And Evan wasn't about to ignore the call of a story left untold. Using a pencil and tracing paper, Evan carefully replicated the faded lines of the imprint. The rough sketch revealed what looked like an engine or mechanical structure, something mid-century, perhaps military. Scribbled in the corner were the words, Mark II. Final adjustment needed. Beneath that, an address barely visible in block letters, 317 Wallace Lane. Evan's mind raced. Was this a prototype? A machine never built? Or something left behind for a reason? He Googled the name James T. Redding and, after digging through military records and digital archives, discovered a match, a World War II mechanic from Kansas City who went missing in 1946. The timing matched. So did the initials on the wrench. This wasn't coincidence. It was history buried in his kitchen. Evan leaned back, staring at the now revealed plan. The note hadn't just been personal, it was a mission. And something told him he wasn't done yet. Determined to learn more, Evan drove to the address written on the schematic, 317 Wallace Lane. It turned out to be a small, aging craftsman home tucked between newer developments. The paint was peeling, the lawn overgrown, but the mailbox still bore the name Redding. He knocked once, then again, no answer. A neighbor watering her roses glanced over. "You just missed her," she said. "The old woman moved out last week. Said she was too tired to keep up with the place." Evan's stomach sank. He hadn't even gotten her name when he bought the toolbox. "Did she leave a number?" he asked. The woman shook her head, but added, "She mentioned something about a nephew in Missouri." Evan thanked her, mind already racing. The trail wasn't cold yet, but it was getting there. Whatever legacy James T. Redding left behind, Evan knew it wasn't meant to stay forgotten. Back home, Evan placed the old tools on his workbench, tools worn smooth by hands that had shaped something lasting. He hadn't touched a wrench in years, not since high school shop class. His father, a corporate accountant, had always discouraged blue-collar distractions. But holding that wrench felt different now, like an invitation, not a detour. He started small, tightening the loose handle on his front door, oiling a creaky hinge in the kitchen. The feel of turning bolts, the rhythm of fixing, it all came back like muscle memory. With each turn of the screwdriver, his mind quieted. No job interviews, no emails, just hands and steel and focus. He realized it wasn't just about finishing James's project, it was about remembering something Evan himself had long forgotten. In fixing these little things, he was fixing something inside, too. And something deep down told him the best repairs were still ahead. A week passed, and Evan found himself spending more time at the bench than on job sites. He pulled his grandfather's old bike out of storage, rusty, forgotten, just like the toolbox had been. He remembered riding that bike down gravel roads in Oklahoma summers, the sound of the bell, the way his grandfather's hands guided his first turn. As he polished the chrome, replaced tubes, and realigned the wheels, he felt something more than nostalgia. This was heritage, breathing again through his effort. The tools from the box fit the bolts perfectly, as if they remembered the bike too. Evan caught himself smiling for the first time in weeks. This wasn't about restoring a bicycle, it was about restoring connection. The act of building, fixing, restoring, it wasn't just physical. It was personal. And with every bolt tightened, he was rebuilding more than a bike. He was rebuilding a part of himself. One evening, as Evan admired the finished bike gleaming in the fading sunlight, he had an idea. He snapped a photo of it next to the toolbox and posted it online with a short caption, "Restored. Using tools from a yard sale treasure. Anyone know James T. Redding?" He didn't expect much, maybe a few likes, a couple of curious comments. But by morning, the post had exploded. Dozens of messages poured in. Some recognized the name from old military newsletters. One man claimed his father had served with James. Another shared a blurry photo of a mechanic squad from 1944, James was in the back row. Evan stared at the screen, heart racing. The story wasn't just personal anymore, it had become communal. The toolbox had opened more than a panel, it had opened a window into a forgotten chapter of history. And now, more people wanted that chapter to be heard. Evan refreshed the post again and again, watching comments multiply. Veterans, history buffs, even grandchildren of soldiers chimed in, piecing together fragments of James T. Redding's life. One woman messaged to say her grandfather had once mentioned a Jimmy Red, a genius with machines who could fix a tank with chewing gum and spit. Someone else pointed out a line in the letter Evan hadn't fully understood, "If this ever finds the light, let it finish what I couldn't." The speculation grew, was it a prototype engine? A lost invention? A hidden message? Evan realized he couldn't stop now. He wasn't just honoring a legacy, he was becoming part of it. People were invested, and more importantly, inspired. What began with $5 and a dusty box had now captured the imagination of hundreds. And Evan knew the next step would take him far beyond his apartment walls. Among the sea of comments, one message stood out. It was from a retired archivist named Harold Quinn who claimed to have catalogued a collection of post-war invention patents. "Redding's name came across my desk once," he wrote. "He submitted a partial design, but it was never completed or approved. Something about a compression engine with adaptive torque." Evan's pulse quickened. He arranged a call with Harold, who explained that many veterans returned from the war with ideas, but few had the resources to finish them. Redding's file, he said, was marked pending development and then lost in a budget cut. Harold offered to mail Evan a scanned copy of the archived sketches. When it arrived, Evan compared it to the imprint on the letter. It matched almost perfectly. The lines, the curves, it was James' design. Only now, nearly 80 years later, it had found someone willing to build it. Evan cleared off his workbench, laid out the scanned schematic beside the original imprint, and stared at them for hours. The design wasn't just impressive, it was ahead of its time. An engine that adjusted torque based on terrain and load, potentially saving fuel and reducing strain. With modern materials and digital modeling, it might actually work. Evan didn't have an engineering degree, but he had something just as valuable: grit, curiosity, and a network of online support. He reached out to forums, makerspaces, and even a retired mechanic in Ohio who offered to 3D print the prototype housing. Bit by bit, help poured in. What began as a one-man journey had become a collaboration across state lines. Each message, each tool lent, felt like a nod from history itself. Evan wasn't just restoring the past, he was reviving a dream that had waited decades for the right hands to finish it. The first test took place in Evan's uncle's old barn, drafty, dusty, and perfect. He had spent weeks building a replica of the engine James T. Redding sketched all those years ago. Parts came from across the country: a machined crankshaft from Minnesota, precision springs from a retired engineer in Arizona, and a custom aluminum frame from a friend in Detroit. When Evan tightened the final bolt, his hands trembled. This wasn't just metal anymore, it was memory, legacy, and a piece of someone else's unfinished story. He took a step back and flipped the switch. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. Evan laughed out loud, breathless with disbelief. Outside, the sun had begun to set, casting gold across the barn's wide doors. Somewhere, he imagined James watching. But the engine was only the beginning. Now, Evan had to figure out what it was truly meant to power. Digging deeper into the archive scans, Evan noticed a faint second page tucked behind the engine plans. It wasn't technical, it was personal. A note from James, scribbled in rough handwriting: "This engine was meant for the hills, where trucks stall and people give up. If it helps one farmer haul, one child get to school, it'll be worth the grease." Evan felt a lump in his throat. This wasn't about money or patents. James had been designing a tool to serve small communities, those forgotten backroads where aging engines failed and help rarely came. Evan's mind turned to the rural town where his mother grew up. He remembered the sound of tractors struggling, the old school bus that broke down every winter. Suddenly, the purpose was clear. This engine was meant to move lives, not just machines. And Evan realized he had the chance to finish what James had started, with even bigger impact. Evan reached out to a friend of his late mother, a farmer named Clyde who still ran a small produce route through steep Missouri backroads. Clyde's old pickup had stalled so many times that he now carried a spare battery and fuel filter in the passenger seat. Evan offered to install the prototype engine, promising nothing except that it might run smoother than the old rust box. Clyde agreed, half curious, half amused. The day of the test, Evan bolted in the engine, tightened every line, and crossed his fingers. When Clyde turned the key, the engine hummed, clean, powerful, responsive. On the uphill road to Miller's Gap, where trucks normally wheezed, Clyde's pickup moved like it had found a second youth. "Feels like she's breathing again," Clyde said, eyes wide with wonder. Evan smiled, but deep inside, he knew this was just the beginning. James's engine had finally found its road. Word spread fast. Within days, Clyde had told every farmer at the co-op about the ghost engine under his hood. A local journalist caught wind and ran a short story titled, "World War II Veterans Toolbox Sparks Modern Invention." Soon, Evan's inbox was flooded, farmers, mechanics, school bus drivers, all asking about the engine, all struggling with similar uphill battles, both literal and figurative. Some offered to donate scrap parts. Others sent old family blueprints. A retired machinist in Iowa offered his garage to help fabricate components. For the first time in his life, Evan didn't feel like a guy between jobs, he felt like a builder with a mission. The project was no longer about finishing someone else's legacy. It had become something living, growing, evolving with every email and every turn of the wrench. And somewhere, Evan imagined James nodding in approval as rural America began to stir with new energy. At the local high school, the story inspired the auto shop teacher, Mr. Ramirez, to start a legacy engine project with his students. He invited Evan to speak, and what was meant to be a short visit turned into a 3-hour workshop. Teens who once rolled their eyes at wrenches now argued over torque specs. One student asked, "Did James really build this during the war?" Evan nodded. "He started it, we're just helping him finish." The line stuck. It wasn't just about engineering, it was about connection. Generations apart, hands were still turning bolts with the same intent, to move something forward. A student suggested printing "Reading Revival" on their shop aprons, and the name stuck. Other schools reached out next, wanting to start their own chapters. And just like that, James's forgotten design became a movement, reviving not only machines, but the spirit of problem-solving across small towns nationwide. Just when Evan thought the momentum might slow, a letter arrived, on official White House stationery. It was brief, but powerful. A presidential advisor had read about the project and forwarded the story to the Department of Energy's Rural Innovation Task Force. "We'd like to talk," the letter ended. Evan stared at it in disbelief. That same afternoon, a major parts supplier called and offered to sponsor 100 engines for farming communities in need. News outlets picked up the story, CNN, NPR, even a feature in Popular Mechanics. But Evan never forgot the rusty box, the attic, the letter written in shaky wartime cursive. Every headline, every handshake, led back to that quiet moment when he chose to open the toolbox instead of storing it away. And now, what had begun in a dusty garage was fueling change across the country, one torque wrench and one town at a time. Late one night, after the noise died down and the inbox was finally quiet, Evan found himself alone in the barn again. The original engine prototype sat covered with a tarp, surrounded now by newer, more polished versions being prepped for shipment. He sat on a crate, holding the original letter from James T. Reading. The edges were soft, the ink fading. Evan whispered, "We did it, sir." And for the first time in weeks, he let himself cry, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. He wasn't a boy fixing bikes anymore. He was a man carrying someone's dream forward. The letter had never asked for fame or reward, only hope. And somehow, through grease-stained fingers and aching muscles, Evan had answered. But one thing still lingered in his mind: who was James T. Reading beyond the blueprint? What kind of man wrote a dream into folded paper and left it waiting? Driven by the question, Evan began a deep dive into public records, military archives, and handwritten census sheets from the 1940s. After days of cross-referencing enlistment papers, he finally found it: a James Theodore Reading, born in 1919 in Topeka, Kansas. Mechanic in the 3rd Armored Division. Honorable discharge in 1945. No children. Never married. A lone note in a veteran's registry, skilled in field repair innovation. Evan tracked down an address where James had lived after the war, an old duplex, now vacant. The landlord allowed Evan inside, and there, in a corner closet, buried under paint cans, he found a shoebox. Inside were photos, James in uniform, working on jeeps, smiling beside nameless friends. And one photo, creased and fading, of James holding a small child with "Hope for Tomorrow" written on the back. Evan held it close, realizing he was now part of that very hope. Evan took the photo and letter to a local veterans memorial center. With the director's help, they arranged to include James T. Redding's story in a special exhibit honoring unsung innovators of war. Evan donated the original blueprint and engine prototype, placing them in a glass case beside James's service photo. At the unveiling ceremony, Evan gave a short speech. James didn't live to see what he started. But through his idea, through all of you, he's still moving the world forward. The audience, farmers, students, veterans, stood in applause. For Evan, it wasn't about legacy anymore. It was about gratitude. He had started with an old toolbox and found purpose, community, and a deeper understanding of what it means to carry someone else's dream. But there was one final tribute to make, one more bolt to turn before the journey was truly complete. Evan returned to his own backyard one quiet morning, toolbox in hand, the same one where it had all begun. He cleared a patch of soil beneath the old maple tree his mother once planted and set a smooth stone into the earth. On it, he engraved simply, James T. Redding. 1919, unknown. Hope for tomorrow. It wasn't an official grave, but it was sacred just the same. A place where invention, sacrifice, and memory converged. Evan knelt beside it, placing the photo of James and the child into a sealed frame, burying it gently under the stone. You deserve to be remembered, he said. Now you are. As the wind stirred the leaves overhead, Evan felt something settle in his chest, a quiet peace. The last bolt was turned. But as he stood, he realized something else. This was not an ending. It was the seed of something new. Within months, the Redding Revival project evolved into a national nonprofit. Evan named it the Tomorrow Engine Initiative, a nod to James's quiet vision. The organization began building simplified, durable engines for communities in need, from remote native reservations to Appalachian towns long ignored by modern infrastructure. Engineering students applied for fellowships. Veterans taught high schoolers the art of machine work. Farmers donated barn space. What began in an attic toolbox had become a movement of people fixing what others left behind, not just machines, but trust, hope, and dignity. Evan often gave talks but never took credit. This isn't my story, he'd say. It started with a man who believed the world still needed fixing, even when the war was over. Whenever he said that, he'd glance to the back of the room, where a photo of James T. Redding always hung, smiling quietly from the edge of history. Years later, Evan sat on his porch as a group of students arrived in a dusty van, eager to learn, to build, to carry the torch. He smiled, holding the worn blueprint one last time before placing it into their hands. It's yours now, he said. Just promise to keep listening, to the past, to the people, to what matters. They nodded, unaware they were continuing a ripple that had begun decades before. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Evan glanced at the old stone beneath the maple tree. The wind whispered through the leaves like a thank you. In the end, all it had taken was an attic, a letter, and one man willing to open a rusty box. If this story moved you, give it a like and share it with someone who believes small actions can create lasting change. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that honor quiet heroes and hidden legacies. See you in the next one.